trade tensions between the U.S. and China not slowing down as the Wall Street Journal reports that U.S. prosecutors investigate new allegations of technology theft against Huawei. ACME Capital's Hany Nada and Kevin Delaney of Quartz both join us here at Post 9. Happy pre-Labor Day weekend to you guys.
Good morning.
Hany, if I recall, you were pro a tough stance against China when it comes to IP and other things. When it comes to these tariffs, September 1st, December 15th, are you pro this approach? Does it depend if it gets near-term results?
So, look, I think the tariffs are I think they're going to do some harm in the near term. I think you're going to see pricing increases in the U.S. I think you're going to see trade tensions worldwide, globally. But I think the longer-term impact is actually much more detrimental to China than it is to us. What's happening right now is tech companies are moving their supply chains out of China into Vietnam, Malaysia, even Mexico. That's actually good for those countries. So over time, the tech companies are going to adapt to the changing supply chains. China's going to be losing jobs. It's going to lose manufacturing capacity. That's where the big impact is. That's where our hammer is in these trade negotiations.
Is that the measure, though? Who gets hurt worse versus whether it actually helps?
Well, I think the long-term impact, what you want to have is you want to have an equal playing field for tech companies in China. That's the goal, I believe, of these tariffs.
Kevin, who do you think is suffering the most from this?
Well, I think what we're seeing is that U.S. companies are already suffering. We saw Cisco talk about recently in their latest earnings that they were actually being de-invited from bidding for Chinese contracts in China. And we also anticipate, December 15th, we see that there are a bunch of tariffs that are scheduled to go into effect, which will impact things like video game consoles and telephones and computers. There are U.S. sellers of these, both on the retail level and on the brand level, who are actually probably going to feel some of the pinching.
But is it fair to say that some of the Chinese companies will be feeling this more? I mean, Huawei, for example, perhaps feeling things more than Apple is.
Yeah, but I think I go back to John's question. We're here where I think everyone agrees there's a pretty high risk of recession in the economy, and we're applying a sort of really unpredictable approach to trade negotiations, which is affecting consumer sentiment and business sentiment more broadly. And so the question of who is hurting more from a trade battle is kind of an academic one on some level, given the conditions currently.
Is there a risk that the longer this trade dispute goes on, that we see kind of a bifurcation of technology across the world, where you have countries that use the technology from China, the splinter net, I've heard that term used before, and is that a big problem for the long run in terms of our technology development as a society? I
think, we really need to think about that. We just did a big in-depth report on China's investments in Africa. And what you see is that China has invested on political and business levels, economic levels, infrastructure in Africa. Africa is one of the fastest growing markets in terms of population growth, economic growth. I think it's hard for American companies to expect that the African countries, if they're faced with a choice between China and the U.S. in terms of internet infrastructure, in terms of technology service, in terms of all of these important categories, that they're going to go with the U.S. I think that there is a very strong risk that that market is much more captured by China at this point than people realize, and that China's just one, Africa is just one example.
And Hany, that goes back to the pain threshold question, I guess. Whether someone, it's like the slap game at a certain point. Like both people end up pretty bruised. But given that situation in Africa, given that Huawei continues to sell around the world, is this a situation where either you end up erecting barriers to the internet, which really devalues the network overall, or you have to solve this one way or another?
Right. So at ACME, we're looking at 10-year trends. We want to invest for 10 years. So I look at the science and innovation part of what's happening in the world. The U.S. still has the best science to technology to product on the planet. I mean, we are cornering the market when what's happening in sensors and nanotechnology and quantum computing. I think as we look towards the future, if those technologies don't have a level playing field globally in trade, we're going to be at a disadvantage. People are going to copy our IP and then present it as their own in these other countries, and we're not going to be able to sell our products. That's the long term. That's the real reason why this trade war is happening, in my opinion.
Well,